Today, I'm getting out of the rat race and heading for the hills. Everglades House and Gardens span over 5 hectares on Gundungurra land in the World Heritage listed Blue Mountains. A garden from a bygone era, it's currently owned and cared for by the National Trust New South Wales. Simon.
Costa, nice to see you. Welcome to Everglades.
Great to meet you. Wow, it's breathtaking.
It's not a bad place to work.
Simon Cooper is the head gardener. So, compared to Sydney, this is a cool climate garden.
It is. So we're about 1,000 metres above sea level, above Sydney there, and roughly 5 to 6 degrees cooler. Plant accordingly to our elevation and temperature, and we've got some classic cool climate plants like the Pyrrhus and some beautiful old maples as well, and they've become a really beautiful part of the garden.
The garden was designed by Paul Sorensen. He created over 100 gardens during his career, but he's best known for Everglades, built in the 1930s.
There's a hell of a slope that comes down this property, so it's all been terraced out to create these rooms, and they're all held back by these magnificent stone walls.
The work that's gone into them, and they're so incredibly straight after all these years.
This one is probably my favourite wall on the property, about 30 metres long.
The way that each of those holes has a natural curved piece of stone, it looks like they're actually pieces of pipe.
It does. I think he went to a lot of thought in doing this part of the wall, just to create these little domes for planting in, little amphitheatres of stone.
It's all leading to this.
It is. So probably another focal point in Sorensen's design of the garden. So it comes down to this very large urn, which is in front of one of the significant trees in the garden. There's wych elm, which is one of the early original plantings, and they're a little bit rare, a little bit hard to find. Under the urn here, under this elm, we've got this lovely ground-covering juga with the tall purple spikes, and that can be found throughout the garden. Barely maintain it, and it'll spread very, very happily, either in the shade or in the sun.
So who was the owner of this place?
The owner was Henry van der Velde. He is a Belgian-born entrepreneur. He bought the property in 1932, 1933, and basically started building a house and garden as a weekender.
Wow, a weekender. Was Sorensen given a free rein in terms of the design?
To a point. He and van der Velde would consult regularly on their views of the garden and what they wanted to see. Sorensen commissioned this kind of artwork in the courtyard of these wrought iron panels that would tell the story of van der Velde's Sealyham Terriers. He also had peacocks in the garden, and the dogs used to chase the peacocks, terrorising the peacocks, and then Mr. van der Velde with his golf clubs chasing the dogs away from the peacocks, and he would catch them and he would lock the dogs up.
And while there's plenty of the personal packed into this place, these days the house and gardens are open to everyone to come and have a look at the grand design. Where in the world do you get to frame anything remotely as spectacular?
Not many places. I think one of Sorensen's design points for this area of the garden is he couldn't really compete or didn't want to compete with the grandeur of the valley. That is one of the main focal points in the garden, one of the most popular spots, as you could probably tell by the lawn. It's all worn in front of that window. And because it frames, you've got an automatic picture.
Beautiful space, but what about all of the moss? This wall is amazing. It's like it's alive.
It's really...
Our tour continues deep into the Everglades estate.
This is the very lower end, almost the very lower end of the garden, so it's the southern end.
So what was Sorensen's intention for this part of the garden?
He had an influence by Japanese gardens at this point. He did do some of it while he was here, and other gardeners along the way have continued that vision.
I mean, there's a massive amount of structural work going with the the creek line and all the stone.
It is. So these are thought to be all hand-picked and hand-laid to create this little meandering watercourse. There's rock tubes for the water to go through and small little waterfalls and pools. The way that the maples kind of hang over the watercourse as well, it's a great look.
Looking out over the glade area, the eucalypts are just stunning with the grass beneath them.
They do stand out. You've got the nice lush green grass, but then you've got the white stem of the eucalypts, and they complement the area quite well. And we are doing our best to retain as many natives down in this area as we can. In the event where we can actually leave a dead or a dying tree, we'll try and do that to create habitat. So instead of removing the entire tree, we'll just remove the canopy and create a few small slits higher up for microbats. There's hollows for possums and birds as well.
The Banksia there is such a feature.
It is, so it's quite an old specimen. Kind of matches in with the stonework as well. They kind of look almost the same, the bark and the stone. It could almost be a stone tree standing in the glades.
This is quite the view.
It is.
Looking down, listening to the water, seeing the rocks. How did it come about?
At the end of the 1930s into the 40s, Sorensen was down here with his workmen, digging a lot of this grotto pool out, all the soil and the rock, and then somehow managed to put a 40-ton boulder at the end to dam the pool and create this naturalistic part of the garden.
From up here, you just feel like it was always there.
So we've got a lot of ferns, so we've got king ferns and the tree ferns, and we've got dudea ferns as well, but on the rock face we've got the rock springilia or Springilia monticola.
With the little white flowers.
With the tiny little white flowers. It's a native to this area of the mountains, a bit rare and a bit special, and it likes to hang on these sandstone walls.
And further along, a cluster of towering exotic trees return us to the European roots of this garden. This part of the garden has such a different feel. There's so many large trees.
It's a tight grove of planting of conifers and the occasional oak. So this is the alpine area of the garden. It was created basically to mimic what alpine area in the European environment looked like. They do look good when they're planted in a grove like this. It's a bit more naturalistic than having one feature tree out by itself, and we're doing our best to maintain them and keep them in a healthy condition.
And this was Sorensen's vision, and now you're maintaining it.
We're keeping it in perpetuity for generations to come, hopefully, as best as we can.
For me, Everglades is a place to let the imagination run wild, to ponder, to wander, and to incubate the next big idea in my own little patch. Here at Everglades House and Gardens in the Blue Mountains, head gardener Simon Cooper looks after a collection of rhododendrons that date back to the 1930s, when Everglades was built. And Simon's showing us how he propagates this classic. So with a cutting, when do you do your cuttings?
After flowering, they'll start to put on some beautiful cutting material. It's a shrubby one, about 2 metres tall. So basically cutting, so right down to where the softwood meets the hardwood. You want something at least 10 centimetres long.
Okay, and then what's the next step?
I'll just put a small wound on either side, just a shallow shave. That increases the surface area for the rooting powder or the rooting gel to take hold and encourage those roots to grow. We've got a mixture here of coir fibre and perlite, so 50-50. Make sure it's moist, makes it easier to get into the pot. We've got a pencil, a little hole in there for our cutting. Snip a few of the lower leaves off. You want to leave probably about 4-5 leaves and cut those ones in half to reduce the transpiration that comes from those. Dip that into the rooting hormone, stick that into your coir fibre. You want at least 1 inch covering. Keep that moist, keep it out of direct sunlight.
How will that progress?
So probably over the next 6 to 8 weeks, depending upon your conditions, you'll see roots starting to come out of the bottom of the tray here, and then we'll pluck that out. We'll put it into a 6-inch pot, and in about a year, you should have a cutting that looks a bit like that, and in a bit less than 2 years, you'll have a cutting that looks like that.
But worth a go.
It is. It's always worth a go. It saves you money.